likely vulnerable to a DOS attack, which is exactly what we want for the one of the later attacks. And especially, and since we know that the HTTP is essentially vulnerable, I decided to see and check if it results in anything if I typed it into a web browser, as can be seen here with me typing in the HTTP : / and the IP address of the victim, and it says it works, though there's no content on there, so doesn't seem like there's much to it at first glance. But that doesn't mean there's not more than meets the eye. If we go back, say, to the nmap that we did before, we could see essentially, one second while it loads. Well, before we even get to nmap, we can check via the NIKTO vulnerability scanner tool to see what else the basic pentesting virtual machine IP address could provide. And let's see, as we type in that, we'll type in NIKTO-H and then the IP address of the basic pentesting. And as can be seen, it shows the target, IP, hostname, port, and several different lines of information. And that also notes, as the nmap did, that the secret folder is a potentially interesting folder. So I will then type in to the HTTP browser the IP address /secret, and as can be seen there, well, when we first bring it up, the formatting is a little weird, but I added the VTCSec as a host in etc/hosts and with the IP address of the victim, and it formatted the website very well. But when we hit login, the way we find out is by hitting login and seeing that it has VTCSec as basically the domain. And essentially we want to be able to log in, and as can be seen, I logged in with the username admin and the password admin, which could be obtained from the wordless comment.txt file through a WordPress scan, since the website is built off of WordPress. And now we'll run the Metasploit console and use the WordPress admin shell upload module. Essentially use the exploit, as can be seen here, once it decides to load. Just wait a second. Okay, there we go. Now I'll use the exploit /unix/webapp/ wp_admin_shell_upload. And it'll say no payload configured, but we'll do that in a minute. But first we want to essentially check our options and see what we need to fill in, which is quite a lot. So before we even get around to exploiting, we need to set up quite a few things, such as the L host, which is essentially the Kali Linux machine. And we also want to set up the R host, which is essentially the victim's virtual machine. Oh, as you can see here, the payload options is already set to the default meter pretr, reverse TCP. We can keep it like that. And essentially, yeah, we'll set the L host, we'll set the R host, we'll set the password, and we'll set the target URI and the username. The username we already know is admin, and the password we also know is admin. Not a very secure website. And the R host will use VTC SEC when we go about to doing that. And the L host will be 192.168.56.102. And the set target URI will be /secret once we get around to it. Yeah, once we set it all up, then we'll essentially, what's it called? Trying to blanking here. We'll essentially open the options again and make sure that everything is set up correctly. And as can be seen here, everything is set up correctly, or how we want it, I should say. And now that the options are all correct by the looks of it, we can begin the exploitation process. And we'll wait for the exploitation to load. Give it a second. And we can see that it's loaded with the METR PRETR module. And we'll get the UID, which is www/data, which is not exactly what we want, but it's a starting point. We essentially want to be able to get into the victim's machine. But in the exploit, we essentially, well, I guess we're exploiting again. Had to start over real quick. In the meter reader, we want to, I guess I'm calling it the meter reader. We essentially want to import a Python shell. And that'll be done via Python with this command right here that'll spawn a shell inside bin bash. And using that, we want to be able to access the etc/shadow folder, which holds the encrypted passwords. No, mistyped. Well, first you have to run shell before you even run the command, or else it won't work. So then you run the Python shell, and then after that we are going to use the cat command in order to essentially unload the shadow folder, which holds all of those passwords. And as you can see at the bottom, Marlin's Spike has quite an encrypted password, which we're going to copy and save for later. I saved it to the nmap.txt file. And let's see here. Yeah, I saved it to the side. It's not visible right there on the screen at the moment. Yeah, just double checking again to make sure and see what exactly the user is, and we're still www/data. And now we're exiting the metapreter just because we don't really need it anymore. We used what we could for it. And we're essentially going to try to exit out of this exploit too. But we still want to stay within the Metasploit console. And we're essentially going to use John the Ripper, that module, in order to decrypt and display the password. And we'll do that by running John and in quotes home or /home/Kali/desktop/nmap. Well, that part is essentially the link to the text file, because it'll read the text file and then try to decrypt it. Essentially, it's basically a way to decrypt and dehash a file. guess I forgot to create the file, but we'll do that now, as you can see. And that's what we want. And now we'll run that. And as you can see, it is done. And now we will use the show flag in order to essentially show what the password is. Which will be done basically the similar-ish command, but with show in between. And as can be seen, Marlin Spike is the username, Marlin Spike is the password. Not a very secure system. And during all that, Security Onion was trying to generate alerts. However, it was unsuccessful in doing so. Just because of perhaps the nature of the machine, who knows, it just was not able to do so. But now that we've worked with the nmap command, we will perform an exploitation attack on the Pro FTPD 1.3.3c. And we will start that by doing essentially search exploit in order to search for Pro FTPD 1.3.3c on exploit database to see if there's any information on how to even perform it. And it looks like it's a backdoor command execution through Metasploit, which has been noted in the nmap in the previous attack. So nice how it all connects together. And since this is a Metasploit attack, we will go back to using Metasploit through the MSF console. And when we are in the MSF console, we are essentially going to search for Pro FTPD in order to find the correct exploit that we will need to use. We know it's a backdoor, but we don't know exactly which exploit it is or exactly how to word it. And it looks like the bottom one shows that there's an exploit for Pro FTPD 133C backdoor command execution. Perfect. That's exactly what we want to use. And we will do so by putting in the Metasploit console use and the exploit that I am copying right there. And type that out. Oh, gotta add the slash there. And perfect, now we are using the exploit. And like before, we have to set up everything. And since we already know what the options kind of look like, we know that we have to set the R host to essentially be our victim's machine. This time we will use their IP address since we're not using the HTTP website, which that is the IP address for the victim or the Basic Pentesting Ubuntu machine. And we will also essentially find payloads this time instead of using the default. And for this, we are going to use the payload CMD Unix reverse, which is the double reverse TCP or Telnet payload. Honestly, you can really use whichever one you want, but for this I use that. And let's see. I will set that payload, as can be seen here. Okay, now the payload is set. And now I will, let's see here, show the options. And it seems like we have everything we really need for this one. We don't really need to set up much more. Well, aside from the L host, actually. That's the only one we really need to set. We don't need to use the admin, or the username, password, target URI, none of that. But the L host will obviously be the Kali Linux because we obviously need to exploit from something. And now we will essentially run the exploit. And we'll wait for that to work. And we can see it's sending a backdoor command. Give that a second. It's trying to reach the machine. Okay, seems like it's opened a shell, opened a backdoor into the Ubuntu machine, and now we'll see who I am. And I am the root of the machine, which means I'm in control of the root user, as can be seen through the who am I and the UID. And since I want to go a little further, I want to perform the exploit and get the password, I will use the Python shell again. And we're essentially going to follow the same procedure as before, though this time via the backdoor. So I'll use the same Python command as before with spawning a shell inside of bin bash. And now we are in the root VTC SEC. Isn't that interesting? And now we will run the cat and /etc/shadow. And as, well, /etc/shadow, not with the slash at the end. And as done before, we will see the exact same thing as last time. All of these different encrypted passwords and hashed passwords, and Marlin Spike at the bottom with what I want to say is the exact same text as before. And we will also copy that to a text file, and this time I just named it marlin.txt. Doesn't really need to be very creative, you just have to remember where it is and what it's called. And then this time, well, as you can see, that's what we need to copy. We don't need to worry about anything else. And with this, we will also use John the Ripper, the password cracker, in order to essentially crack the hash again. And so, let's see. Now, we will exit out of Metasploit, or at least not out of Metasploit, out of this exploitation. And we will, let's see, essentially run the John the Ripper hash inside Metasploit, I should say. Just as we did before, John in quotation marks, home, Kali, desktop, Marlin this time. Really, it's just the address to where the text file is that we need to crack. Apologies for it being cut off. Just recording the virtual box or recording from there just doesn't seem to work as well or work as nicely as it should. So it's cutting off a bit at the bottom, but the output displays it. Displays exactly what we need. And as we can see here, or part of what we can see here, we executed that command, and we're getting the exact same thing as before. So I can almost take a guess that this time the password will be Marlin Spike again. But let's make sure before we say anything too soon. Yeah, we'll want to recopy that and then run John //show and then home Kali desktop Marlin. And let's see what happens. And yeah, it looks like got a little cut off, but I can promise you that it essentially showed that Marlin Spike was the password as shown before in the previous attack. And just to affirm this time that it is the correct password and I'm just not taking it at its word and not really checking to make sure it is correct, I will go to the Basic Pentesting virtual machine and double check that it's right. So I will go to the home screen and type in Marlin Spike. Since I was able to log in, that's already a good sign. But give it a minute to log in. But when we do log in and get the ability to open the terminal, we'll want to just double check, perhaps with the who am I command. Well, as you can see here, Marlin Spike at VTC SEC. That's already promising. We can tell that we're Marlin Spike. That's the ID. But when we sudo su, we'll try to get into the root with the Marlin Spike password. And what do you know? Here we are. And when I do who I am, or who am I should say, we get the root. And that's how it should be. So once we essentially start running the ping, we'll be able to see how long the response time is. And we can see it's pretty low, but it does grow pretty fast response time. I mean, it goes from 0.867 to 563 milliseconds, or 800 milliseconds, or even 1400 milliseconds. So we can see it's slowing down the machine quite considerably. And that's what we want. We want it to flood and shut down, because that's what a DOS attack is. And now we will essentially flood it once again and see that it's still pretty flooded from last time. But now we will be using the IP Fire firewall, and we will be pinging on there to the Kali Linux machine. So we're pinging and seeing what's happening here. And from the IP Fire, we want to ping and essentially filter out the packets, just so that we can basically make it so that the packets don't quite flood the, what's it called? The victim's virtual machine as much as we wanted to. That's for the hping 3 attack. So we're hopping around a bit here, but as we could see, the packets are being filtered quite frequently. And now here, well, with these, we're essentially just using the firewalls. And we want to be able to add this IP address, which is the attacker's IP address, to the IP tables, and save it, and essentially show that it is dropped. We want it to be blocked on everything. So now we are going to utilize nmap this time and run the nmap attack as we did before, same exact commands, but this time we are basically going to monitor it from the basic pentesting's perspective, or the victim's virtual machine. And with nstat, you don't really see much, but with the sudo su, you go into the root and do a TCP dump on the interface that the basic pentester, or the victim, runs on. And basically you want to monitor the attacker and listen in and see if the attacker does anything, or see if it can catch anything, which it wouldn't have been able to before without the firewall. Firewall is essentially letting you know, hey, the attacker, there's someone attacking and trying to access your machine. And as you can see, it does make contact several times. As you can see with 192.168.56.101, which is the victim's virtual machine, and 0.102 is the attacker. So it does make contact several times. I can even say requests right there. See, it says there's a request from the attacker to the victim. And we also want to be able to run a cat of the syslog, which we'll be doing in just a second. But first we can see the amount of packets that are captured and filtered, or received by the filter. Well, we'll get, basically the cat syslog just told us everything that we just saw. But now we're on to the Metasploit, and we don't really need to add the attacker's IP to the firewall again, since we already did that. But now we're running the MSF console, and we're essentially going to run the same exact attack, except also this time the firewall is involved. And yeah, so essentially, even though it looks like it's cut off, we can see we're using the same exploit, which is the PROFTPD133C backdoor. And we're going to set up everything the same. We're going to set the our host to be the IP address of the victim. We're going to set the L host to be the address of the attacker. And we're also going to set up the payload to essentially be the CMD reverse, just like we did last time. Now, as we can see, everything's set up correctly, so we can start the exploit. And on the other side, with the victim's virtual machine, we'll also be checking out the TCP dump, but we'll get to that in a second once we set up the exploit correctly. And I'll just have to take a second to type it out. Yep, now it's being exploited. And now whatever commands we run here in the exploit will actually be reflected in the basic pentesting virtual machine. So say we run the whoami command or get UID. It'll be reflected there as well, which is pretty neat to see in real time. Yeah, right there, it seems like I'm not doing anything, but I'm working on both at the same time. But I'll just show you what I'm working on after I switch over to the other virtual machine. So see, it says who am I, and then it's the root. And when we switch over to the, well, we'll check the ID as well. It's not really that important. But when we switch over here, we'll run the TCP dump. Again, these are running simultaneously, by the way. They're not one after the other, because you want to make sure that it's catching what's going on at the same time. And as you can see, the top terminal is the TCP dump. Well, on the bottom, we're going to run the cat syslog, which shows us a little more detail about the attack. And yeah, with that being said, that's pretty much it.